Hello everybody, this is Post-Production Pie with srlounge.com. Today is December 31st and I want to wish you all a very happy new year. Now I'm feeling a little excited. I don't know why actually. We always just sit around the TV and watch New Year's on TV. We're kind of me and my wife are a little bit of a boring couple, but kind of a homebody, but that's all right. I hope you guys all go out and party, do your thing. Anyway, welcome to another Lightroom 4 weekly edit. Now in this episode, we're going to be creating a lovely little kind of sunset mood shot in this image that we are working with here. This image is of a beautiful couple that I shot this last week. Their name is Deanna and Lars, and they are a wonderful couple, just kind of in this nice little scene here on the beach out in Laguna Beach, California, throwing around a football in their favorite football attire. She's actually wearing an SC t-shirt, which you can't see too clearly, and he's wearing his Dallas Cowboys jacket. So anyway, they're having a good time on the beach. It's a little bit cold outside, but that's no problem because we're going to make it look warm in just 1 second. We're going to hit I just to bring up our information and go over how this image was shot. This was taken on a 5D Mark III on a 24-70 f2.8 Mark II lens, and we're going to be doing a full review on this lens soon. This lens used to be one of those kind of necessary evil type lenses for me. I really did not like shooting on the 24-70 except for just when I needed that versatility and focal length. With the Mark II, it's become one of my favorite lenses again, and we'll talk about that more in the review. But this was shot at f2.8 at ISO 1000. We shot at f2.8 just to kind of give a little bit more separation on the background, just to create a shallower depth of field in this shot. This is around sunset time, so it's getting a little bit dark. We shot this in a way that if you look at the histogram, we're basically shooting this almost as or what we would refer to as a single shot HDR. We're basically trying to compress everything in this one single image, and we've done a really great job. So we're basically exposing the right, pushing the highlights all the way to the right side without clipping or without blowing out the highlights and without clipping our shadows. Now, what we're going to do for this image, or kind of the direction we want to go, is I want to create this nice, moody sunset image that has a lot of warm tones in it that just looks really nice and warm because it's fairly chilly outside, guys. It's a little cold. Once again, with all of our Lightroom 4 edits, we're going to edit this first using the Lightroom 4 preset system, but for those that don't have the preset system, we will go through all the settings as well. The effect and what we're doing is going to be very simple. What we're going to do is go over to soft portraits, and in this mixology, we're going to choose the soft portrait HDR light preset. Okay, now after this applies that effect, I just want to basically darken the exposure a bit because I'm not trying to create this bright, kind of properly exposed portrait here. I'm trying to create a nice mood shot. So I'm going to darken it by about 0.5, and then let's go down. Let's see, I want to kind of leave the blacks a little bit darker than normal. So I'm going to go click on heavy brighten, and I might want it to be just a bit higher than this. So I might go over here and just dial this up by, say, 2 notches. But that's essentially it for the basic processing. So just those 3 clicks, okay? Now let's close up this little menu here on the left side. And all I'm gonna do now to flip it into kind of that moody mode is to, I like that word, moody mode. Let's get into moody mode. It sounds like I'm saying movie mode. But we're just gonna bring up the temperature, and I'm gonna flip it up kind of somewhere in the 8 to 10,000 range. And just play around with what I like. And I love this kind of orange warmth to it. Again, if you feel like when you're making things warm, if you feel like it's not quite looking right, a lot of times it's because your magentas are off. Sometimes, especially if you're shooting Nikon, generally you're going to be getting more green tone images and the tint's going to be down here. What happens is when you start warming this up, it has this kind of like weird, not so kind of cozy by the fire look. This kind of has this green look that makes it feel very off. So to counter that, all you're going to do is raise up your tint so that you're basically bringing back in those reds, bringing back in those pinks, magentas technically. I know if I don't say magenta, one of you guys is going to call me out and be like, hey, Pi, it's magenta. And I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, I know. Can I just not say pink to you guys? And so let's just say magenta. So I'm going to bring this up to like 20 to 30 and then raise the temperature even more. And this is what creates that kind of really rich tone in the image because we're mixing these warmer tones with the reds. Gives us this nice orange look to it. All right, so I'm going to bring it up to like 94, 9500. And this is looking quite awesome already. Now, from here, we're just going to do some minor tweaks. Once again, I like to have these kind of deeper shadows in these types of shots. We have these beautiful highlights from the sun on their faces. We kind of have this rim lighting on his back. I want to keep that. I don't want to bring all the shadows out and kind of lose that environmental feeling, that mood shot feeling. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to enhance this image just a bit more. First, I'm going to go into my adjustment brushes. We're going to select, oh, actually, you know what? I forgot to go over all the settings with you. So before we jump into adjustment brushes, let's just go over our settings. Now for temperature, we're at 9500. This is where I feel like it's looking pretty good. Tint plus 30. We brought the exposure down by 0.5. We brought the contrast up to 50 because we did kill quite a bit of the contrast by adding that kind of HDR effect. So we're basically pulling down the highlights, pulling down the whites, bringing up the shadows, bringing up the blacks, and then we kind of get that balancing out of the overall tonal range. For clarity, we're going -10 right here, and that's fine because we're going to be painting in quite a bit of clarity actually with our little adjustment brush, so that's totally fine. Vibrance is at -10. We can actually leave this probably around 0 just because in this image, we do want a little bit of that exaggerated color, exaggerated tone. So bringing that up to 0 is actually going to improve on that. Most of the time, because this preset is generally used on images that you're kind of worried about skin tones, you're going for a proper exposure, we reduce, or not a proper exposure, but proper skin tones. We reduce vibrance by -10 because it helps kind of counteract all the additional colors that lifting out the tones brings. Okay, in this image, we're not worried about that so much. All right, now in our tone curve, we have our standard S-shaped tone curve to boost a little bit of the contrast. We don't have any split toning added for detail. We're going with our standard detail, sharpening 70, radius 1.5, detail 10, 30 masking. And we do have a bit of noise reduction just because we're doing so much lifting in the shadows. So this is applying a bit of noise reduction there. As far as lens vignetting goes, it has just the standard amount of lens vignetting, which is just counteracting kind of that darkening of the edges. So we essentially get kind of an even edge-to-edge tone. And what I might do is do a little adjustment on this left side too, and I'll show you guys how. All right, so that's it for the basic settings. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is, I should have probably done this at the very beginning, but I'm going to hit R to bring in my crop, and I just want to fix the crop a little bit. What I'm going to do is just bring in the center point of the image just by holding down Shift, dragging on that right side or the right corner, and I'm just trying to make the space from his shoulder to the edge of the frame and her shoulder to the edge of the frame about the same, just so it has kind of a symmetrical balance to it. That's the composition that we're going for here, so I want to make sure that we actually pull it off if I didn't quite hit it in camera. All right, so that's a little bit better as the composition, or for the composition. Let me expand it just a tiny bit. I think I went too far. Let's go about right there. Okay, so this is looking better right there. Now the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a graduated filter. We're going to go down to the +1 dodge, and I'm going to pull this in from the right side. And basically what we see here is just this sky is naturally falling to a darker look over here, and I want kind of more even tones because the sun's over here, we're just getting dark over there, and I don't know. I kind of like fixing this stuff sometimes just so it looks a little more even. Now it's a very small adjustment that we have to make, and this brush is going to come in heavy-handed. So remember, just go over to the right side and dial it down. We only need about a 0.2 to a 0.3 adjustment to get the tones even from edge to edge going across the frame. All right, that looks good right there. And now let's make our adjustment brush. And I'm going to show you guys a little trick here. Let's go into our sky, cloud, ocean detail enhancer. And once again, if you don't have these presets, just hit pause right now. You can dial in all the settings right away. But we're going to paint this over the entire image, okay? Now, once I get over the entire image, I'm going to go and hover right over this little dot that we added in, and we can see the mask. But instead of doing anything to the mask, or instead of painting it out yet, what I'm going to do is actually click and drag to the left. Now, if you go to the right, basically it's going to make the same effect more powerful. If you go to the left, it's going to make it less powerful. And what it's doing is it's adjusting in incremental amounts, meaning that it basically will retain the exact same settings. It's just going to amplify each one. So it's not going to amplify them basically all equally. It's going to look at basically what those settings were to begin with and kind of adjust accordingly. All right, so we're just going to de-strengthen it basically. We're going to pull it a little bit to the left side until we get this nice balanced mixture between kind of a poppy look versus, you know, going too far. I don't want it to be too crunchy. I feel like over here it becomes kind of just too crunchy, not natural enough. So I'm going to pull this back to around here. All right, now the one thing I'm going to do to make the final adjustment is we're going to hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, but rather than just removing this from her skin, I'm actually going to do it with the Auto Mask. I generally don't use Auto Mask, as a lot of you guys know, because I feel like it doesn't do a good job, or it doesn't do the best job in a lot of cases when you're essentially painting or masking around objects. You'll get kind of these fringes and these lines and just these weird kind of artifacts from this effect. But when you're using a brush that's been applied in a very subtle manner, the auto mask can actually work pretty well in these kind of situations. So rather than trying to just paint it off manually and kind of doing this on our own. We're going to actually enlist the auto mask's help. So while we're holding Alt, now this is very important. You can't do it when you're in this mode right now. We're painting the effect on. If we were to auto mask this, it's only auto masking when we're painting on the effect. So while holding Alt, we get our eraser brush, and now we actually go and select auto mask, okay? So size, feather, and flow actually apply to whether you're erasing or whether you're painting on. So if I let go of Alt again, then you'll see that my size, feather, and flow and auto mask have changed. All right, so just remember that each one of these has different settings. So let's hold Alt or Option again, and now we're just going to remove basically from, I'm really only worried about her skin tones and kind of her hair and stuff. But if I want, I can remove it from really everywhere, like her entire person. But let's just keep it kind of quick for the sake of this tutorial. We'll remove it from her hands, and it just kind of brightens it up a bit. And you'll see that on her hands, it does do kind of a guessing job, and it went in between the fingers right there. But once again, because this is a very subtle effect, it didn't make too big of a difference. Now here's one other tip when you're using this auto masking tool. If you're zoomed out and you're trying to apply this auto mask on a larger scale, like if you're zoomed out to here, Lightroom's not going to know exactly what you're trying to do. You want to basically zoom in, make a very fine brush, like a finer brush, so basically shrink the size. I'm just using my mouse wheel to scroll up and down. And as you're painting, paint along that edge. Now once you're doing that, it does a better job of guessing what you're trying to do, as opposed to doing it from a very zoomed out kind of view. Okay, so over here, we're going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to turn on auto mask. We're going to paint it back in where her fingers are. And I'm going to shrink down this brush. And again, if we kind of paint around using very fine brushes in these areas, auto mask is going to do a great job of guessing what it is we're exactly trying to paint and what we're not trying to paint. Okay, so hopefully this helps you guys in understanding exactly how auto mask works and kind of knowing the situations that you can get the most out of it. Let's zoom into her feet. Let's do the exact same thing. We're going to have auto mask on, go to a kind of a brush size that's appropriate, and just kind of paint right along the edge of her foot and all the way down here and then up. Okay, now notice on this highlight, we get a little bit of that strange artifacting because it's kind of guessing, since this is such a high point of contrast, it's kind of guessing that that's some area that we want to auto mask. It's not. So I'm just going to shrink the brush. Oops, I covered a little bit of the ocean over here, or the sand. I'm going to shrink the brush and just go over this line until basically it realizes that that is not one of the areas that I wanted it to mask. Okay, it'll eventually come out. You can also turn off the auto mask in these kind of areas and then just do it manually, basically, when you get to that highlight. It is up to you. But you can see how in these areas where the tones, basically the tonal range is very similar, there's not a lot of contrast, it does a fairly good job of guessing. It's just once you hit those higher contrast areas, it does not so good of a job. Okay, let's go over to his feet. We want to bring out his feet a little bit. I want brighter skin tones, not so dark. Okay, again, that little higher area contrast, we got to drag over that a couple times. And let's go over his feet. I don't know why, but every time I'm working on feet these days, I always think of Frodo Baggins. Not that their feet are anything like Frodo Baggins' feet, but I don't know, feet just remind me of The Hobbit. Okay, this is great. I'm just going to paint it back in. Again, auto mask is selected on both of these, and so it's kind of helping me with getting these fine-tuning settings. Now this is going to work perfectly fine because, again, his hand is right against that darker jacket, and so it's going to do a great job of guessing in this kind of case because it's such an area of high contrast that we don't have to worry about it. All right, let's go to his face. Same thing here. And you can tell that, you know, again, auto masking works much, much better when these effects are very subtle to begin with. Because if they're very powerful, if they're very strong effects, you're going to see a lot more fringing around those areas of basically where the effect is being applied versus where it's not being applied. So just kind of keep that in mind. I generally, when I'm going with a stronger effect, I'm not using auto masking because I don't want that fringing occurring. Okay, that's looking much better. Let's go to his hand. This one's kind of okay just because it's in the light. It's also kind of blurred a little bit, but that's all right. We'll just fix it anyway. Okay, you can start to see a little bit of that fringing going on. And this is where we'll have to do a little bit of fine tuning. So I'm just going to shrink and just go over this area a couple times. And if it isn't doing a good job still, we're just going to turn it off. So while holding Alt, I'm going to flip it off and flip it off in a good way, not in the bad way. All right, and you can see that now that I'm removing it on these fingers, it's removing that fringing effect. Okay, So that is basically it. Now, if we want, we can check the rest of our area. I don't think we have any other fringing issues. I'm going to zoom out and take a look at this overall effect and see if I want to kind of back it off just a little bit, and I don't. I think it looks great just the way it is. What I do want is now just to apply an equal slight vignette on each side just to pull in our attention just a tiny bit. I want it to be equal again. I want each side to darken the same amount. And I still see a little bit more darkening on this left side, so I'm just going to go back to my graduated filter. We're going to adjust this up a bit just so it matches the same kind of brightness as this right side. All right, so this is looking great. I'm happy with this. Let's check out the before and the after by hitting backslash. So here is the before, here is our after. We've done a great job of creating this nice, warm, mood tone sunset shot of them playing football. Now, the one distracting thing right now to me is just this little clump right here of rock behind his head. Now, this is going to be one of those tough areas to fix in Lightroom, so it's probably more of a Photoshop job because it gets so close to his hair over here. All right, so we won't worry about that here, but I will probably take it out in Photoshop just before I post this online. Great job, everybody. Hope you all have a wonderful New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We'll see you guys in the next episode.